Hey guys, Travis Gillespie. Let's take a look at a couple of parallel lines here. Right here and here are two parallel lines cut by a transversal. In fact, this section we're going to deal with parallel perpendicular lines, and exactly this example we'll look at identifying congruent angles formed by transversal. So again, got two parallel lines cut by a transversal. Cool. Let's actually measure some of these angles to see if there's a relationship between the angles and their measures. We'll begin with number one. But to do that, I've got to go to another sheet. Let me pull that up. Cool. So what I'm going to do here is let's bring another file on the screen. And from here, see how this works out real quick. So I'm just taking that picture and putting it up on another screen, and I'm going to bring this protractor up to the front. Let's actually zoom in and measure angle 1. Set my protractor up, and so if I set this protractor along the line, the 0 along the line with, or if I set the protractor's line with this first parallel line, now if I start at 0, which I'm going to do here, and get a cool pen to work with me. Well, I can see that, hey, the line is going to be about here. So starting at 0, move on up. So it appears that the measure of angle 1 is 40 degrees. Well, I'm going to write that down before I forget, so go back to my paint. Just say, hey, the measure here of angle 1, change pen colors. So this guy, measure 1. Just clean up my writing a little bit. The measure of angle 1 equals, having a little bit of trouble with the pen today. Let's try this out. Try it one more time here. So the measure of angle 1 equals 40 degrees. Well, I also know that angle 4 here and the angle 1's, these two guys, well, they're vertical, which means that they're always congruent. So that means that the measure of angle 4 equals 40 degrees. Well, it also looks like angle 5 and angle 1 might actually be equal to each other. But let's make sure. I'm going to pull up the other screen again and use that protractor here. I'm going to say, hey, what I'll do is select a pen here. Run out a pen, get my mouse, and now I'm going to move my protractor down the screen. See what the measure of angle 5 is. Yeah, that actually looks like, hey, measure of angle 5 is also 40 degrees. Start at 0. So the measure of angle 5 is also at the 40-degree mark. Cool. So the measure of angle 5 is 40 degrees. Go ahead and write that down as well. Move the screen down just a bit. So the measure of angle 5 equals 40 degrees. Well, if you look up here, measure of angle 5 and measure of angle 8 are vertical, which means that they're always congruent. So measure of angle 8 is also 40 degrees. Cool. So angles 1, 4, 5, and 8 are 40 degrees. Well, what about angles 2, 3, 6, and 7 here? What do those measures equal? Let's go ahead and measure them and find out. I'm taking the protractor again here. Say, all right, let's go and measure angle 2 first. Here we go. Just moving this over. Put my line on the parallel line. And okay, cool. So what I'm seeing here, if I take my pen, measure all the way over, starting at 0, going all the way around the protractor. And here's my stopping point. Actually, it's not my stopping point. The line goes through, it looks like at 140 degrees. So my stopping point will be here at 140 degrees. So the measure of angle 2 is 140 degrees. A new pin to this. Measure of angle 2 equals 140 degrees. Well, that makes sense because the measure of angle 1 is 40 degrees, and 40 plus 140, well, that equals 180. And you know that a straight line cut by a transversal, well, that creates a pair of angles that are supplementary to each other, meaning they equal 180 degrees. So a straight line is 180, it creates 180 degree. Cool, well I know that since angles 2 and 3 are vertical, no, angle 3 must equal 140 degrees. Cool. Well, it also looks like angle 6 and 2, the measures of angle 2 and 6 are actually equal, but I'm going to verify that again. Let's go ahead and use the protractor. I'm going to actually move it down here. Yeah, and if I actually start at 0 again using the protractor, I'm going to take a different color this time, maybe just a highlighter, see how the highlighter works out. But if I start at a measure of angle 0 and just move on up all the way around the protractor and stop right here, sure. So it looks like the measure of angle 6 is 140 degrees because 140 degrees is right here on the protractor. So let me go back over to the paint, say the measure of angle 6 equals 140 degrees. Well, since angles 6 and 7 are vertical, they are congruent, which means that angle 7, the measure of angle 7, also equals 140 degrees. Cool, so in measuring these two parallel lines cut by a transversal, this specific transversal here, creates measures of 1, 4, 5, or measures for angles 1, 4, 5, and 8 of 40 degrees, and measures of angles 2, 3, 6, and 7 of 140 degrees. So what you really see here is that when you have measures that are equal, what you can really say is, hey, these angles are congruent. Because they are equal, they are congruent. Cool, so since they're congruent, I can actually write that out here. Go a little bit more space and actually go ahead and just separate this out just a little bit more. And let's actually write this out showing that these angles that are equal are congruent. The way to do that is I would go ahead and say, hey, measure of angle 1, measure of angle, got to be sure that I write small enough here, angle 1 is congruent. And what I'm going to do, actually, I'm feeling like I'm going to run out of space. So what I'm going to do is just zoom out a little bit. Cool. Actually state that the measure of angle 1 is congruent. That's the congruent sign there. Change the color on that guy. This guy is congruent to the measure of angle 4. That guy is congruent to measure of angle 5. And also congruent to the measure of angle 8. Cool. So these are the symbols for congruent, meaning that, hey, measure of angle 1 equals measure of angle 4, or it's congruent. They are the same. So now let's go ahead and say that these guys are the same by writing that they're congruent by saying, hey, the measure of angle 2 is congruent to the measure of angle 3, who is congruent to the measure of angle 6. And this guy is also congruent to the measure of angle 7, it looks like. Cool. So since measures of angles 1, 2, 4, 5, and 8, measures 1, 4, 5, and 8 all equal 40 degrees, they are all equal, therefore you can write or say that they are congruent. Also, because measures of angle 2, 3, 6, and 7 are equal, they're all 140 degrees, you also can state that they are congruent.